It's not the Chinese fault that they were, treated as cheap labor by the American state.
We are, in a weird way, slightly fed up with talking about tariffs because it's all we talked about for the last week. But it is interesting that China has just upped the ante again. The US has got 145% levies on China. China has said, hold my beer, and come back with 125%. I mean, Michael, you've been obviously a foreign correspondent. I don't think you were based in China. You've done Moscow and Washington. Is it silly to say who's going to win? I mean, this is unsustainable for both sides.
Absolutely,
and the
yes.
globe.
It's a sort of macho contest. And, I mean, in the end, somebody's got to have to concede in some way, or else they both step outside their battleground and find some other thing to argue about, or some other way of finding an agreement, and it's sort of quietly removed. I mean, the trouble is that you never quite know what's coming out of Washington. It's like, I just learnt a new word, which is remuda, which is a bunch of wild horses where the rider decides which one to ride. And that's rather like the policies in Washington. There's a whole bunch of policies swirling around, and Trump decides, I'll ride that one today. I'll take this tariff thing and I'll ride out and see who I can challenge on it. And you don't know whether he'll tired of that stallion and will pick a new one the next day and have another policy. And China just has to, China is not going to be pushed by any lively horse prancing towards it. It will put up a fight, and we'll have to see.
Can you just segue? The word is remuda.
Remuda, yes. It means a group.
Where did you learn this word?
Oh, a friend just told me, and I read...
Well, you were just discussing wild horses with a friend, randomly.
A friend used it in something he'd written. I said, what on earth does that mean?
Sounds like Jacob Rees-Mogg. Now, Donald Trump has made it clear that Britain is still going to face 10% tariffs, even if we secure this famous trade deal with the US. In fact, he was speaking at the White House last night, and he made it clear that he's sticking to his current tariff plans.
We think we're in very good shape. We think we're doing very well. Again, there'll be a transition cost and transition problems, but in the end, it's going to be a beautiful thing. We're doing again what we should have done many years ago. We let it get out of control, and we allowed some countries to get very big and very rich at our expense, and can't let that happen. It's not a sustainable formula.
Now, Claire Fox, you've had 7 days, you and your fellow Brexiteers, to say that Britain had a Brexit dividend from not being part of the EU. That's gone away, and we're still going to be clobbered by tariffs. Wouldn't we'd be better off if we'd stayed in the EU on this, wouldn't we?
No, I'm not going to be diverted down that path.
It was worth a try.
In the last 7 days, I have tried to avoid sounding like a cliche and saying, Brexit benefit. Listen, I think it's absolutely fascinating, by the way, that Douglas Alexander is in China. So, yes. I mean, whatever about them doing an EU deal, one of the things that is peculiar about the beautiful deal that Trump says he's done is that if he'd have actually initially just made this tariff war aimed at opposing China, then it actually might have impressed the rest of the world. Because he actually made everybody in the world a victim of the tariff wars, he's actually, ironically, managed to make China an attractive proposition. Who could imagine a situation where China is able to boast that it's going to lead the world in free trade? Who knew that was going to happen? And also, where you have America as leading a huge amount of instability in the world, China, precisely because it's an authoritarian regime where small matters like democracy don't count, can offer stability. So in a peculiar sort of a way, one of the unintended consequences of this is that China becomes more attractive for the international community to talk directly to them, something which is a rather dangerous situation where the authoritarians become the more attractive option.
Absolutely. And it was a bit like that with Trump 1.0. We had a brief and utterly self-indulgent discussion about Michael Gove earlier, but he was on our podcast, How to Win an Election, this week with Sally Morgan, Polly Mackenzie and Hugo Rifkin. the reason we want to play a clip is because obviously he met Donald Trump, famously interviewed him when he was briefly working for the Times in between cabinet posts. And in fact, there's a slightly ghastly photo of Michael Gove and Donald Trump, both with their thumbs up in Trump Tower. But this is what Gove had to say about meeting Trump.
Trump either wants to be liked or he wants to crush you.
Yeah.
So one of the things that came through was when I and Kai Diekman entered the room, he turned to one of his aides and said, "Hey, who are these two good-looking guys?" And no one has ever said that whenever I've entered any other room.
So basically, Gove is perhaps stating the obvious, that if you want to get something out of Trump, you've just got to really suck up to him.
Cozy up to him, absolutely, yes. And it's a bit of a difficult thing because if you cozy up too much, you're just flattened. I mean, you look like a wimp, and Trump doesn't respect wimps. He likes strong people.
Absolutely. I mean, Claire, you've not met Donald Trump, which surprises me.
Why does that surprise you? I've hardly met anyone. But I know lots and lots of ordinary people. The Trumps of this world, I don't know. But listen, I also think we need to avoid what's been described as Trump derangement syndrome. We have to understand why it is that so many American voters were attracted, superficially at least, to Trump's offer of this, which is there is something understandable about people feeling that their jobs were sold short, outsourced, offshored, and so on and so forth. And the state and perilous nature of the American manufacturing base, which Trump tries to blame on everyone else. I mean, it's not the Chinese fault that they were, treated as cheap labor by the American state. But nonetheless, that globalist offer is proving unattractive to millions of workers everywhere, right? Because they were sold short by it. They can't understand that. And therefore, as much as I despise many aspects of Trumpism and think that this has been a debacle and it appears to have exposed him as not knowing what he's doing, I also don't want to fall into the everything Trump says, everything Trump does, everything about the Trump leadership is to be treated with contempt, because we've got to understand what's going on in the world rather than just kind of react in a kind of meme-like fashion.
Actually, it's interesting, Claire, given you're a non-affiliated peer, I'd love to have your thoughts on how you think Keir Starmer is behaving, because when you were talking like that, it was interesting. It reminded me, obviously, that 3 or 4 days ago, I think it was in an article in the Times, Keir Starmer effectively said globalisation is now dead. I think Tony Blair might even have said it as well. Do you think Keir Starmer is simply saying what he thinks Trump wants to hear, or do you think he has got a realistic assessment of how things have fundamentally changed? You presumably don't think he's kind of got it in terms of what ordinary people think about globalisation.
So I think it's quite feasible that Morgan McSweeney has got it, who's advising Donald Trump from a kind of blue Labour standpoint. And, Morgan McSweeney, if he said it, might sound right. When I have to say, when Keir Starmer said it, it just sounded like there were words coming out of his mouth without me being convinced he knew what he was talking about. But what obviously has happened is that the globalist rules of the post-war period have started, and the international order, which everybody sang the praises of, did very poorly for millions of people. That's what I'm trying to say. It's run out of steam. And so the shake-up that America tried to initiate is no bad thing. The way they've gone about it and the egotism and the narcissism that people have referred to, obviously it doesn't help. But I think we just need to be careful of baby and bathwaters. And to be fair to Starmer, because he did say those words, that is reasonable, right? We can't just say the world order will carry on. Genie's not going back in the bottle, because what Trump is reflecting is a broader populist sentiment, as it were, bottom up, that got him elected, that basically says this old internationalist, globalist world order is not good enough. The status quo won't hold.
I think it's very good to be reminded, obviously, Michael, that there were reasons why people voted for Trump, and there are reasons why people vote Reform. And however much we might shroud wave about the chaos of the last couple of weeks, the fundamentals remain the same, which is there's a particular type of voter who has felt completely left behind.
Yes, indeed. And not only that, they feel they've lost control and that the country's lost control. And that this idea that there's a kind of global conspiracy or global network that isn't subject to the laws of any particular country, that has its own agenda, and that individual countries can't do anything about their future or their policies or their direction because they're so tied up with all the sort of world trade orders and, international agreements on this or that. And there's a feeling, take back control. That is, bring it back to a local level where we see what's happening, we can influence what leaders do, and we don't care damn what the world thinks. And that's a very powerful sentiment.